Good morning. Welcome to the Luton Literature Book Festival. My name is Imrana Mahmood, so I'm going to be hosting today's talk. I'm a freelance creative producer. I also host the book club show on Inspire FM. I'm also the founder of Dar Amina Book Club, which is a women's book club in Luton. I'm really delighted, obviously, to be here today, and thank you so much for taking the time out to join us. We will be in conversation with Jasmine Elmer, who is the author of A Goddess with 1,000 Faces. So I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then we will dive straight in. A straight-talking expert in ancient cultures, Jasmine Elmer is passionate about opening up this knowledge to everyone in an engaging, inspiring way. She believes in challenging the traditional approaches and brings her energy and storytelling skills to use the modern world as a springboard to the ancient one. Steeped in ancient magic, dark divinity, and wild ways, Goddess with 1,000 Faces takes you on a historical journey like no other. Blending mythological retellings with historical research, Goddess with 1,000 Faces traverses the world and transports through time to bring 10 formidable and inspiring ancient goddesses to life. So I think we can probably just dive straight in. I think my first question is really looking a little bit into that introduction, that you're described as a straight-talking ancient world expert who likes to keep our histories real and keep them personal. Why do you think it was important for you to kind of challenge those more traditional approaches to this subject matter?
Well, first of all, hello everyone. Hello everyone who's on the internet web, or whatever you call it nowadays. Yes, great question. I come from a background as a teacher. I worked in secondary schools for 15 years. And I think that kind of is where I discovered in its core essence, what makes somebody love history. And it's not what you think it is. I know we all think, there is this sort of dusty academic vibe where you have to be a certain way to enjoy history. But in my teaching experience, it was all sorts of different types of children that loved history. And I noticed how much they felt that it wasn't for them. They had to be super clever. They had to be ready to get top marks. They had to know it all. They had to analyse properly. But in fact, when I told them it's not about that, it's about feeling your history for yourself and making it relatable to you and personal, they light up. And it's like a different way of thinking about it. And then so when I came into doing this for a job in the public sphere, I thought, well, first of all, adults need that more, actually, because many people's school experiences when it comes to history are pretty negative, I'd say. Not only are they possibly feeling like they have to be this expert scholar to enjoy history, but also people of colour, people of different underrepresented backgrounds are not seen in their histories. I know that because I've taught the curriculum. And I wanted to change that. So when I came to this work, I thought, right, this is time to big up the platform a bit and get this kind of history. Let's keep it straight, keep it real, keep it in our hearts, basically. So that's where it came from. And that's why I think it's just so important, because it's our history. It's our shared history. No matter who you are, you have your history. You don't need to speak Latin fluently to know a bit about the Romans, essentially.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I don't even speak Latin fluently.
But it's that interconnectedness, isn't it, despite what our own kind of backgrounds and heritages are. Sure. And I think I sort of resonate with completely what you're saying, because I took history for GCSE, and I remember really enjoying it, but just not seeing myself actually, and actually how is this related to me or my family or whatever my kind of context was. But you kind of invite the reader to interrogate, like in the introduction to your book, to interrogate their past, and you're encouraging them to reclaim the goddesses. So I think we just kind of described, wise women of bygone times. So why was it important for you to begin the introduction, I guess, with that kind of reminder?
Yeah, I mean, off the back of that, when I was thinking about this for myself, I thought, right, I'm going to write a book. It started there. I have no background in writing, apart from I do have a master's. I've written a dissertation, things like that. But I haven't got a background in creative writing or anything, no training. But I really wanted to write a book. So I thought, OK, first point, let me turn it on myself. What is relatable to me today? I'm a woman in my midlife now. I'm like, what do I feel like I want to hear? What are the books that I don't see for me? And I'm mingling that with my background as an ancient world expert. So it was kind of like, what do I want, but what do I think others want to hear too? So that's kind of where the book came from, and why I wanted to upfront say that, yeah, you're going to learn stuff. Yeah, there's new stuff in there. There might be stuff you already know, but I want you to be introduced to my style of history. I call it, I've got a little thing. It's not got a little TM, but let's just put that little TM next to it, right? Just in case anyone back there's trying to steal it. It's called History with Soul. My idea for history is that you can, like I said, it's coming from your heart. We often like to learn the facts of history, right? Like, in 1415, the Battle of Agincourt happened. If that's true, I'm well happy with myself because that's out of my period. But so someone online is already writing, that's not right. But okay, so sorry, not my period. Should have picked an ancient one. But my thing, there's nothing wrong with those facts, but I want us to rather approach history through there. I want it to come through here first. So to put that straight away in the book, I wanted people to situate in that space. Plus, if you flick it, you're like, not for me. I'm not dissing facts. Facts are cool. Especially, I'm not going to get into the political climate just yet with everything. We need facts. If you think about what's going on in the US, facts are important. But let's just like access first through the heart. And I think as a woman in my midlife, that's something that I find has changed in me, my ability to empathise and come from that place. It's always been there for me, but it's stronger the older I've got. So I thought, keep it real, come from that straight away.
And I think you definitely sensed that. I mean, we were talking just actually before we began about that kind of topic of accessibility and what does that mean. And actually, I thought the book was wonderful. I learned so much. And I guess what I'm thinking is, of course, you're an expert. But how much research did you still really need to do, I guess, to get it on paper in the format that you've kind of decided to kind of write it in?
Yeah, and this is to give a little insight into my character here. When I was like 4, I used to walk around saying I could run really, really, really fast like all the professional sprinters. I had a thing that I could do stuff, is what I'm trying to say. So when I sat down to this book, I was a little bit afraid because my comfort zone is most of my qualifications are as a classicist, so ancient Greece and ancient Rome. But my personal background as a person who's mixed race and growing up in the East End meant that I don't see history in this sort of very, let's be honest, white lens of what happened just in Europe. I wanted to go out of that. So whilst I had some grounding in some of the other cultures, for example, ancient Egypt, I do have qualifications from uni in that, and some other cultures that I'd seen before, a lot of them were just brand new. And I was a little bit terrified. I'm not going to lie to you guys, because I was like, I don't want to misrepresent. But then I thought, this is what everyone thinks. This is why everyone stays in their lane and doesn't have a bold view about how to do history, because they're afraid, because academics often are very afraid to be criticised. And I think the important thing for the public to know is that's often because a lot of them have forged careers and they're working at the same time in universities. So they have like rigorous academic backgrounds that they need to kind of, keep safe, if you like. But what's cool about me is I don't have that. So I can kind of be a bit more free-flowing without worrying about what those academic communities might say about my methodology. That's not to say it hasn't been thought about from an academic perspective. I'm just saying that I could be free. So when it came to the research, I started with chapters where I was more comfortable in the culture. Because let's add this other layer. That's my first book. So I'm writing a book for the first time on top of this. So I thought, let me start with what I know and see how this naturally evolves for me. And then when I had that format down, I started to deep dive into some of the other cultures. And I'll tell you what, there were some old skills that needed to be dusted off. I did Spanish at university for an extra course, and I had to dust that off. I'm 42 now, that was a long time ago, people. But I dusted it off because when I went to look at the goddess Huitaca, who is a Colombian goddess, it was only the Spanish and Colombian academics that have really looked into her. And I didn't want that to be the barrier to not telling her story. So I used my Spanish, I used my connections, I used what I could to research her story, to bring it to this kind of audience. Because otherwise it doesn't, people just go, I don't mean to say they're lazy, and I'm going, I can't be bothered. But it's a really challenging thing to go through steps like that. And I didn't want that to be a barrier. So the research was hard at times. Some of the source material, especially for the goddesses of colour, was very challenging because those are the sorts of things that we don't see white Western academics wanting to spend a lot of time on. And even if they want to, funding, etc., can be really challenging. So that was probably some of that was the hardest, but I was more determined on that to kind of get those stories out there.
And I guess it's just making me think, because obviously as, you were talking about women of colour, and we're talking, I guess, about the publishing industry. We hear lots about representation. Mm-hmm. What was, I guess, that like for you then? Because obviously you have all this expertise, you want to create a book, but then you do want to touch upon the goddesses specifically that maybe don't get the platform. So what was, I guess, what did those initial conversations sound like when you were kind of proposing that you want to do this book and really kind of dive into the stories that are kind of unheard or stay ignored almost?
Understood. I got quite lucky with this, I think, because one of the first publishers that received my book was Dialogue, which is a branch of Hachette Publishing, if any of you aren't sure. It's one of the top 5, but it's a special division that's headed up by Charmaine Lovegrove, who's an amazing woman. If you're into writing, look her up. She's one of the most powerful women of colour in I'd say, UK publishing. And she set Dialogue up with a really important ethos and message to champion underrepresented writers. So I think by taking that book to those people who have an open mind about stories that need to be told and actually go out there on a limb to publish those stories, I think that was that kind of like syncretic relationship that you're looking for as a writer. Because I think that it's easy as a writer for any of you, I don't know if any of you here are budding writers or looking for book deals or anyone at home, but sometimes you're like, you just want a book deal. But actually what's really important is that your publisher and you're working together, and you need to realise that you need the right people with you too, that really get what you're doing. So my editor, Christina, she was just completely open-minded about this and put no holds on what goddesses I wanted to look at, and just trusted my expertise, which is another thing too. So I feel really lucky with Dialogue. So I think that finding a good publisher is a really, really good tip for anyone that's into writing and wants to get into it.
Yeah, no, and that's so fantastic to hear, because I guess sometimes we don't hear that side of things. Obviously, we as readers just see the final book, so it's really great, to hear that. And coming back to the introduction in A Goddess with a Thousand Faces, so you mentioned that women shouldn't need to wait until they reach 40 and the quote is, uncover hidden depths and truths about themselves. And I was like, oh my God, I was kind of getting goosebumps reading it. I thought, God, it's so true. Yeah. But now living in times where, women, we have to deal with things like ageism, and of course there's other prejudices as well. Why did you kind of decide to address this through the story of ancient goddesses?
Yeah, I just want to add a thing. While I'm talking about women quite a lot in my book focuses on femininity, and I see that regardless of what your gender is. So we all have qualities that we might consider feminine or masculine. I mean, those terms are a bit problematic, but let's just keep them here for now so we know what we're talking about. So I just want to make that point. I think when I speak about the female perspective as a woman today, that's just because I'm using my own experiences and hoping to speak to women. And obviously I think that there's so much that I think there's a lot in my midlife that I realise that I've needed that I've never got. And the thing about that is when you get to my age, you start to I can't swear on this, obviously, so I won't do that, of course. But you start to get a bit annoyed. That's the word I'm going to use, about how you've been let down by society. And I'm not pointing fingers. This is not against men whatsoever. It's just the systems that can be inherently patriarchal, that don't suit women, and actually don't suit men, because we need to look after ourselves better. So that's kind of where a little bit of a rage boiled up, if I'm going to be honest. And now I've forgotten the other part of the question. I've gone on a rant. What's the other part?
Why you wanted to kind of address those issues, but specifically through
the goddesses. Thank you. Yeah. Bring it back to the book.
That's my job today. It's all good.
Thank you. And I think when I was thinking about femininity and masculinity, I was thinking about where in the ancient world, I mean, obviously you could look at the societies and you could look at the ways that they're kind of put together. But in some ways I wanted something that could be a little bit more reflective and philosophical. And goddesses felt like a really good place to go to for that. It's also as well because I think that many of these goddesses have been quite maligned, so they kind of represent the thing I'm trying to talk about. So in their societies, they were held up in very high esteem. For example, Inanna, who is a Sumerian goddess, so ancient Iraq, around about 5,000, 6,000 BC, is actually the main deity of the city of Uruk. But we today try and make her scholars have looked at her and kind of gone, oh, isn't she so complicated and all these things. So I bring that up because I saw when I looked at goddesses this kind of actively happening in our scholarship about goddesses today. So I could kind of try and undo some of that. It made me a little bit indignant that there are these amazing figures that we could consider amazingly inspirational to us, because I think they speak to us directly. It's not about religion here, guys. I mean, actually, some of the goddesses I talk about are actually of a modern religion. So, but I'm not asking people to become religious as they look at this, but I do think that you can take it. You can be inspired by stories that are from goddesses, more so than perhaps a history of women in ancient Greece, which is still a good way to do it. But I just felt like there was something a little bit magical, a little bit mystical, a little bit potentially easier to relate to when it's a goddess, even though that might not sound quite right, but I felt like it would be.
You know, I mean, it's really interesting, actually, kind of the way you're, I guess, articulating that, because obviously for somebody, for example, of the Muslim faith, following kind of a monotheistic kind of religion, but actually reading the book is interesting because even, for example, the word Allah, which is obviously the Arabic for God, there is no gender to it. Okay. And, even in that sense, there are both feminine and masculine qualities or attributes you can kind of, I guess, attribute to that kind of divine being. And I think even that, it was just really great because I think you capture that, really, really well. And I mean, what I'm wondering is there's a quote that I wanted to kind of ask you about. And so the quote is, "What a thing it is to be a woman in a man's world, always having to negotiate, concede and pander to their fragile egos." And I was like, I know some people might find that not very... might find that quite challenging to read. But so what is it like working within your field, obviously both as a history expert and an author, and do you think there is enough kind of progress being made to make sure there are more kind of equitable opportunities?
Right, I just want to get onto something. I'm not man bashing.
No.
Men are amazing. I think that with that, I think I see, when I talk about egos, I don't mean on a personal level really ever, and I would never make that comment about an individual. I think there is... I think when I say about men and their fragile egos, what I mean is there's a way of being in this world that is inherently skewed towards masculine, and there is a comfort in that for a lot of men and a discomfort perhaps when we look for change. I would never generalise that. I'm saying that, if you look at it, it can feel like that. So I think that's what I meant by that comment, rather than all men are like that. And now I've forgotten the other part of the question, but go for it, because I just had to make that comment. Go on.
No, it's all
I'm doing
good.
really well today.
So the question being, how is it working within your own field, and what progress, I guess, you think that... Yeah,
that's not always easy, if I'm going to be honest. I mean, I work with some very influential historians in the public area, because I'm also a TV presenter, so the TV world's a very different world to the literary world. I would say the literary world's very open, and I found it very encouraging and supportive. I think the history world is a slightly different world, and I have to be totally frank with you about that. There's lots of... I'll be honest, no one person's been... You want the gossip, I know, you're like, who's been horrible? No one's been horrible to me, everyone's been really nice. But what I will say is that the way that history is traditionally done in the public sphere is quite an entrenched way of thinking, and there is a way of doing it. And it is a successful way, and it absolutely encourages a lot of people into history, so it's a good thing. But what it's doing is ignoring other types of people that don't feel like it's their space. And as with all change, that can be challenging, because when you come in and you look to disrupt a little bit, people can become a little bit concerned or threatened about their type of history. But my point is, I want plurality, i.e. I want us all to have, why can't we have different goes at history? There's this tiny little space here and there's only 3 people allowed in it, we'll all fight to the death to get in it. No, it's not that. We can allow for space for all of us. I'm not gunning for that type. That type of history needs to be there, but can we just have a bit more space? And importantly, make that space for people from different racial backgrounds, religious backgrounds, different genders. We need to be looking at queer histories. We need to be looking at all of these things in a mainstream way, not over here in the side. We'll just allow that over there. It's our responsibility as historians to do that. And I would say that there is a challenge often, not with, I would say, individual historians in the public eye, more with the systems that surround them. So decision makers. So anyone that, for example, is involved in deciding whether a TV show gets made, or are they going to commission this, that, or the other? It's a sort of a longer game to say, hey, let's not get another show about ancient Athens, which is cool, by the way. I like ancient Athens. Like, why can't we look at something just a little bit more kind of, I guess, relatable to the modern audience? And that just takes time. But I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to do it. I'm doing it. I'm doing it now, right now, because they might be watching. Let's get on with it.
So how is it then that you kind of, I guess, came into having interest in the ancient world? Because if we've kind of grown up in an age where we weren't hearing maybe loads of that history, what inspired you? Was it a particular teacher or something you read? And were you a reader, like when you were younger? Did you love reading history books as well?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I should probably, a bit of background would help here. For those of you who don't know my background, I grew up in the East End of London in a council estate. So I went to a really good school that had a great history department. Shout out to Walthamstow School for Girls, well done. But, you know, I think that history just was a natural space for me. I loved it. I just found it fascinating. I'm not going to lie to you, it wasn't my best grade. Okay, just for those of you sitting at home thinking, I was like a B grade. I know they do like numbers now, but I was like a B grade. I was desperate to get the A's, and sometimes I'd get an A, but really I was about a B grade student. But the passion was insane, and I just loved it. And it started there with being fascinated by people, and just wanting to know, how did people live? What can that teach me? What can I learn from that? In some ways, I think it's born of a little bit of a discomfort of the modern world, and like looking back to ancient world and thinking, what did they have then? Is that, like, I'm not saying it was brilliant. I mean, my life expectancy, for example, I'll be nearly gone by now, but it's not great. I'll take the antibiotics, you know. But at the same time, like, in a sort of, I guess I'm a bit of a romantic in some ways, an idealist. I like to look back and think, you know, what can I take from that? I think that started then, quite young. And when I was looking for a degree, I thought, right, I'm going to do a degree. Okay, cool. What am I going to do? It was between ancient world and, randomly, you'll love this, guys, because this is hazard geography. Hazard geography. I mean, I don't know if you can actually do it as a degree now, but basically volcanoes, earthquakes, things that are going to kill you. I don't know what that says about me as a person, but I was fascinated by that too. Actually, and I did a bit of a PhD. I actually quit it to write this book because I couldn't do both, so I thought that's more important to me. And I actually mashed the two up and did the mythology of volcanoes, basically. But yeah, so it started there, and I did my degree, and that was in the ancient world in general, which is a cool course at University College London, and it still exists. And I really recommend it to anyone who's young and thinking about this stuff, because it's vast. You can do like ancient Mexico and stuff. It's cool stuff. Like, so that's the ground where I went, oh, this is actually cool, and I love this. And then I became a teacher, and that's when I guess I started seeing my skill or interest in helping others to find the passion that I have, and that's kind of where it's come from. I've done it my whole life. I can't really not do it now.
And how do you think young people are responding to history now as a subject? Because, I mean, I heavily influenced my daughter to take history as a GCSE, nice, and I'm glad because she's really enjoying it, and I'm really happy. But I guess because, you know, we've got social media, which obviously there's pros and cons. There's so much that young people they have to choose from, and then TikTok's a massive thing. I mean, you know, whatever's trending on TikTok, that's usually the book they want to read, and I don't know how I feel like that.
I need the TikTokers to chuck my book up there, please, guys. Go on.
So, I forgot what my question was going to be. I think it was more about how you think, you can kind of, this is accessible obviously to readers, and it's good, but maybe for young people specifically, like, how do we get them to be historians like yourself?
That's a good question. I always feel like I'd like to ask the young people that, to be fair. You know, like I said, I'm nearly 42. It's a different world. What I know of the younger generation, I feel like the younger generation, I mean, I don't want to be depressive here, but I feel like it's a hard time if you're a young person. There's a lot that feels like it's out of your reach. Things are more difficult financially, politically. And I don't say that to be depressive, because I actually think this generation are going to sort it, and I'm loving that. And my son is over there somewhere. He's 8. I'm hoping he's going to fix it. So I'm an optimist.
No pressure.
No pressure. If you're like under 25, you've got to sort this out, right? But what I mean is I can see that it can be quite difficult. I actually think that history is a wonderful place for young people to find new lessons and new ways, because it shows you how cultures and societies can change and adapt over time. If you just get obsessed with this current situation right now, it can feel like everything can't move and can't change. It's impossible. We're like frozen in this time. How can I take on all the craziness of this world? But when you look at the ancient world and you look into any kind of history, you see that stuff always changes. Fact. There's a fact. Yeah, it always changes. It will change and it will get better. And I think that if young people can find that message, I mean, for them, no, not me telling them, that's the problem. Like a middle-aged woman on a stage is not going to speak like that's maybe that helps a bit, but they've got to find it in their own hearts. If they can find history that way for them, I'm hoping it becomes inspiring as a method to kind of, in some ways, galvanise whatever it is they want to do. You don't even have to go and be a historian. I mean, great if you want to be. I'd love you to be a historian, but like go and use it to galvanise whatever it is you do want to do. And I think that's what that personal vibe that I'm about is to do with.
But I guess at the same time, I completely agree with what you're saying. But, you know, for young people looking to somebody like you, I think is quite powerful, because at the end of the day, in some respects, studying history is quite a radical act, especially if you're trying to unearth stories you don't normally. Because I think, you know, maybe a personal opinion, but, you know, especially within the British kind of society, you know, history is presented in a certain way, and there's much of history that is intentionally ignored because it maybe doesn't, you know, allow people to see the British Empire, you know, in a way that maybe some people would like. So then, you know, in that kind of situation, how do we maybe challenge that? I mean, obviously, I guess this is one way that you start writing more stories, but, you know, and you mentioned even the challenges in kind of the TV world. What more, I think, can be done by maybe historians to tackle that? I don't know,
I mean, I think that's the only thing I can do is be somebody that's doing this, speaking about this, representing my background and my culture, and hoping that a young person can see that and think maybe it's possible. But that's as far as I can go with that. But it is absolutely my responsibility to start smashing down these walls so that when those young people come up, it's easier for them to go, I want to make a programme about... I've got nothing in my head, sorry, that's great. I want to make a programme, the end. Yeah. And that it's not as challenging, and especially people from underprivileged backgrounds. That's the most important thing, because your voice really matters, because you see history in a new way. You see it in a unique way that other people can't. And that's the thing, because that has been made a negative. That has been made like, not you don't know, go away. But actually, that's your superpower. It's your superpower. And I can tell you it's your superpower because I'm making a whole career out of this, using it as my superpower. Because I've been in a million rooms where I've been told, not sure about your accent. You know, okay, where's your 17 Oxbridge degrees? I mean, they're not being this rude, but it's, you know, they're not like directly saying this to me, you know, like, they're like, but the undertone, I've been like looked over for promotion as a teacher because of the way I look or speak. There's all these things, you know, and if I get rejected from something, it might be that perhaps they don't think that that's what a modern audience wants. I'm not making any comments about whether that might be to do with my race or my background, but, you know, they're not ready for this. They're not ready for this. And so, you know, it's my job to... I mean, luckily, I think that's the cool thing about mid-age is I don't care. I'm going to keep coming at you. Like what's that T-1000 thing on Terminator? T-1000, keep coming. And I think that's what people like myself can do, because hopefully it won't be so T-1000-y when younger people get there. Yeah, exactly. But we have a massive public historians, that's the point. It's the public underlined. We're here for you guys. It's responding to what our feel is for what you need and how history's let you down, but also what your interests are, and bringing that to life. And I think some public historians don't always understand that. You might love the Spitfires of World War II and want to write a book about that. No problem. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the Spitfires, but it's also about like how like I think we have a responsibility to think, how does the person that's reading this It's not just telling you the facts about it. How is that relevant to you? How do you want to, can you feel something from that? Because I think that's where the revolution comes in. You can sit there and be entertained by that, but are you going to be changed? And that's what I want to try and do. Maybe I'm just far too lofty with this, and you guys like, just give me the Spitfires and go away. I don't know, but that's what I'm going to do anyway.
No, and it's good, And I'm going to combine my next two questions. So it's kind of, what did you enjoy most writing the book? And also, of all the, kind of goddesses that you written about, which is your favourite and why?
So this was a shock to me, because obviously I've come from a factual background. So I thought this book is technically a non-fiction, so it's all just history. But I wanted to weave storytelling into it. But I've never written a story. There's no MA creative writing over here or anything. And I just thought, I sort of had done a bit of dabbling, just literally on my computer, like, oh, write a little story. But I didn't know how that was going to go. So the bit I enjoyed the most was the story writing. And taking these myths and making them come alive. Obviously, that's a really popular part of publishing. You probably all have, some of you in here, if you're ancient fans, you've probably read loads of the mythical retellings by Jennifer Saint and Madeline Miller and people like that. So I'm not new to that, but I was personally new to it. And so that was surprising for me, that I actually found my home in that more than the bit which felt a bit like teaching, if I'm honest, for me, when I wrote the background stuff, the cultural stuff. So that was a surprise. And actually, it's interesting because there'll be more on this at the end, because you've got a question about it, I think. But about my next book, because I think I want to go into that a little bit more in the next book. But that's what I loved the most. And I'm surprised by that. That flew out of me. Each of those stories probably only took me about an hour to write, which is weird if you've read the book, or if you haven't. They're only a few pages long, but they just flew out. And I was just like, oh, that's exciting. And so that's the first thing. And then the second thing you asked me was about which one of my goddesses. I remember this time. I don't like that. You've asked me to pick between my children. Which of your children do you like the most? Yeah, exactly, an answering. I'll be honest, it changes by the day. I think that each goddess has something very powerful to tell us. And they all came from my heart. So I'm a little bit like, oh, I don't know. But I do feel like the story of Sedna, the Inuit goddess, is fascinating and has a great deal to tell us about. So her story briefly is she's betrayed by her father and cast out into the sea, and she becomes the Inuit goddess of the sea. I mean, I've done that like the shortest version ever. But there is a lot that we can reclaim about kind of our stewardship of the planet, nature, and what it means to come back from trauma, betrayal, forgiveness, finding kind of light in the dark. There's a lot of power in her story, and I found it beautiful because also the Inuit culture is fascinating. It was newish to me, and I found that if you think about an Inuit world, I find that quite fascinating. Kind of that I just mean environmentally for a minute, what that must feel like to live in those very harsh, cold, often isolated environments. So I just something about that I found quite amazing and beautiful. So I'll go with Sedna today.
Okay.
Ask me tomorrow.
Good for today. Yeah.
If you're on Instagram, can ask me tomorrow. It'll be a different one.
No, but I love that because you're right. I think it encapsulates so much, and especially when we talk about anything to do with almost like water or the sea and ocean. There's something so vast in it, but actually really beautiful. I mean, even just hearing, I guess, the rippling of water is really therapeutic. And so I mean, it's really lovely that you've kind of chosen that. And there's something slightly a little bit different, but it was something that you do mention in your book, is the fact that when you were younger, you were inspired about the ancient world. And part of that was obviously by movies such as like The Mummy and Stargate. And I'm sure, those of us of a certain age will have enjoyed those and really like them.
Not just for Brendan Fraser.
No.
Maybe a bit for that though too.
A little bit, of course.
Or Rachel Weisz.
But I guess I was thinking kind of more from a more, because everything that you've mentioned that's going on at the moment, and to what extent you think mainstream Hollywood movies have maybe contributed to some of the understanding of actually other cultures, and especially when we talk about, from like an Orientalist lens as well.
Sure. I think I've just actually I've just been interviewed about, because Gladiator 2 is coming out this month, so Yes, excited. But lots of historians are quite scathing. I don't know if you've noticed this. I don't know if I'm going to get some nods here, but historians tend to be very scathing of movies because they just lose it. They can fully lose it. They're like, no, Napoleon was 1 whole inch taller than that. What's wrong with them? And they just can't cope, and they just freak out. And I think that I understand that. I mean, I'm obviously making fun of it a little bit, but because we're scared, right? History needs to get out there to people. We don't want it to die off. And movies is a major way that normal people experience history. And a lot of people watch a film, and not you guys here, because obviously you're some version of history fan here. But you watch it and go, they think it's fact, and then they go around with that, and then historians freak out because then they have to undo the badness. Now, so that's the first point about it. And obviously I have a certain point to that. I'm not going to lie, I get a little bit frustrated on like what they're doing, why have they done that? Especially because I think the ancient world is already super awesome. We don't need to mess with it. So there's a little bit, but that's just me on a sofa. That's my opinion on a sofa. As a public historian, movies are really important. And I've just answered some questions for, I can't remember what magazine now, Film Magazine, about Gladiator 2, because another historian has lost it about a rhino. And I think that there is a major point the historians are a bit uncomfortable about, which is this is a source of entertainment. It's that first. It's a film. It's a story. The story always supersedes the history. Can we just get real about that for a minute? And I think it's down to the person watching the movie. If you love it and you think, oh, Romans are pretty cool, then people are generally intelligent enough to go, I might just check some of that stuff. I'll just have a little look and see. Not sure about that bit. Like, did he really stand on top of a rhino in Rome? Okay. They had rhinos, just so you know, that's real. Did he stand on top of it? No. Probably not. So I think that Hollywood movies are really powerful and important, and I would just always encourage directors to be as accurate as they can, but I understand that the story's first. And I would say that with those 90s movies that you mentioned, and this sort of the question you ask about an Orientalist lens, I think obviously that's problematic. We have to remember that most of these Hollywood movies are often kind of with a Western viewpoint, and there's a kind of glamorizing. I mean, again, these movies are in the 90s. There was a lot wrong with the 90s. If you weren't there, it was a bit dodgy. It was also cool. We had cool stuff like Baywatch, but even that was bad. So in terms of like how women are represented, how people of colour are represented, how Eastern cultures are represented, not great, because we're not often seeing it from the viewpoint of those individuals. They're not usually the main protagonists or the main kind of characters in these stories. I think that's changing now. I think that, for example, in Gladiator 2, Denzel Washington has been cast as one of the major characters, and people will say, oh, can we have a black man in that role? Yes, there were black people in ancient Rome and they held positions of power. The end, So I think that we can do these things. I think there's time for change. But the thing about the 90s, is it problematic? I mean, when I watch Stargate, I mean, it's about aliens, mate. So first of all, I know it's not real. But like when it comes to the mummy, it's also about mummies coming back to life. So I think I'm all right with understanding that that's probably not actually factually correct. And I think that perhaps I think we're getting better. I think Hollywood's getting better at this stuff, but it's always going to be a story. And I think we should just chill about that. And maybe in some ways that, like, already I've just had to talk in an article about this. There'll be lots of debate about it. That's cool because it sparks discussion. Yeah?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and which is why we're here. And it might actually be a good time to maybe open up to any questions that the audience may have. So we've got a roaming mic. We're just going to assist because we do have live streaming. If everyone can, speak into the microphone, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Shout out to history in the East End. I studied history at Queen Mary, University of London.
Well done.
Very simple. What's your definition of goddess?
That's a good question. It's actually at the beginning of the book, so which was taken from I can't remember if it was the Oxford definition or something. I would say that a goddess is, a deity of any kind of religious context. And I'm going to keep it very brief there because I don't want to hem it in too much. Some of my goddesses are, in fact, more, I would say, even in the line of kind of witches at times, or mystical figures. But I think that they're a deity in a religious context, that there's some kind of worship involved in some way. And And I think we can be a bit loose about it, because when we're looking at the ancient world, I think that we just can. But I think what I was interested in are they a deity of some description? As in, are they seen in some kind of hierarchy of something that is beyond human? And are they worshipped? And is there some kind of religious aspect to their worship? I would say that's kind of what I would say would be a decent enough definition. But I don't want us to get too hemmed down, because I think that there are a number of interpretations, I think. In some ways it's quite personal, isn't it? I don't know in the audience or at home if you have your own personal religion. But for example, if you were pagan today and you worship Celtic goddesses, you might be laughed at. I mean, I don't think at all that's something to be laughed at. That's a choice about a deity that you choose to follow. But to others, it might just be stories. Do you see what I mean? So I think there is a personal element to what you want to devote your kind of, I guess, worship to. If that answers your question.
Yes.
Okay.
I just sort of definitely, but also just sort of goddess as opposed to god. Like, does it have to be the femininity, or is there anything else that goes into it?
Yeah, I mean, good point. I kind of assumed that. Yeah, I think a goddess would be considered feminine, but it's very interesting because I have one goddess in my book called Maulisa, who is worshipped in ancient Benin in Africa. And in one tradition, this is often in the oral tradition, so rather than lots of historical documents that confirm this, hence why there's a bit of a variety. That Mawu is feminine and Lisa is masculine, and they're entwined in one body. And in fact, in my book, I chose to use we pronouns to bring those two genders together in one individual, to kind of make the point that there is a fluidity to this. And in the sense that she's a goddess. In fact, it made it kind of hard for me to pick the pronouns correctly throughout the rest of that chapter, just to kind of keep that point, valid. And I sort of managed it. But yeah, I think
should have invented your own.
Sorry?
Just come up with some new ones.
Yeah. But you see, that therefore is in a book about goddesses. But Maui Lisa, I would say, is a beautiful figure that shows us that we all have divine masculine and divine feminine in us. And that's fluid. So yes, so it's a really good point. So even though I've just said probably feminine, actually not as well. Make it up as you go along. Do you like that as an official one? Yeah, cool. Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? You can just put your hand up and then. Thank you.
Don't be shy. Don't bite.
Hi, great talk. I thought very interesting. I read a lot of books about goddesses. I was just wondering if in your research you found out if there was any real event that created these deities, or if they were just something out of somebody's imagination.
I see what you mean. Do you mean when you say real event, have you got any kind of, even if it's a made-up example?
Well, I've just recently read a book about Perseus. Yeah. And it's been rewritten in as much as all the events that we take for granted about Perseus, that he was a son of Zeus and cut off Medusa's head and all this, that and the other, were all based in imagined real facts. So Zeus was a shower of rain, but that actually came through a roof of a cell, and it was a real person. And Medusa was a goddess with a crown of snakes.
I get you. Yeah.
So they were real events, but they've turned into mythology.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense. Yeah.
Something like that. Do you think that may have happened?
That's really a really good question. So the sort of school of thought you're thinking about there is like rationalising of mythology, and that there's often some kind of, because if you think about myth, if we just come away from religion for and talk about this as myth for a moment, it's obviously a story that's made up by individuals. I'm not saying that's true of every goddess in my book, because some of them are religious figures that are worshipped today, so I would not be disrespectful like that, but some of them are mythological. When you look at myth often is essentially a human psychological exploration of the world in an attempt to understand it, and therefore has some kind of moral or point as at its heart. So that's where the rationalising of myth comes in, and you can apply that to a number of mythologies. And that is something that a lot of historians, it is a legitimate thing. The historians do. I do it myself. It's an absolutely accurate way to look at mythology, but it is in some ways conjecture. So it's like a viewpoint on. So, for example, the work I did on volcanoes, I had a lot about volcanoes representing the concept of chaos here on Earth. And because of lots of the stories are about a god who represents order trying to overcome a monster that lives in the volcano, because one of my specialisms is monsters, because they're cool. But yeah, so that's valid, but it's an interpretation. So when it comes to goddesses, I think that it would depend on the myth, of course, as to whether or not there is a rationalisation behind it. But I think that a lot of goddesses, they have quite a lot of things that they attributed towards them. So not usually just, I'm just a goddess of a chair. It will be many, 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 many things that they're a goddess of. So in lots of ways, where did that begin? And I think that there is almost like a characterisation of a goddess that emerges. How, I can't tell you. But in some ways that then starts to become reflected in the human experience of the world. So if we take the goddess Artemis, who's in my book, the Greek goddess Artemis, she's the goddess of the wild and of hunting. So it makes sense that in those situations there might be more things that we connect to Artemis. A person might be going around hunting and then thinking, there are spirits in the trees. I'm going to connect them to Artemis, or water spirits. I'm going to make them her followers, and then we can build a picture almost like I like to think of it as a core story with like layers that are added over time, and this is where you end up with all sorts of like extras. So she's also goddess of childbirth, even though she's never had a child, and is known as the Virgin Goddess. How did that come about? That's a really good question. But she was held very dearly by young women, so young girls before puberty and around puberty. And it could just be that those girls held on to her as their childhood goddess. And a bit like if you were religious today and you've had your God with you your whole life and you grow up and they're still there with you, then perhaps Artemis became translated into the world of childbirth when those same girls gave birth. So it's a kind of like beautiful, moving, shape-shifting thing that absolutely has a rationalisation at the point, but it would definitely depend on the context of each thing. I think a lot of them have in common some way of understanding the physical world. There's usually an aspect of like the physical world. So goddesses are often connected to celestial bodies, Venus, sun, stars, moon, nature. And as we know, we all kind of have a concept, I think, that we always often see nature as a feminine thing, Mother Earth. And so I think that they're in the domain of the goddess there. Why is interesting. Maybe it's a feeling. Maybe it's all real. That's what I'd like to think.
That's a great question. Thank you. There's somebody at the back. Thank you.
What's the oldest goddess known to historians?
It's a good question. Don't like the question though. No, it's because I don't. We're always discovering things, and I think that can be quite hard. It's also quite difficult because what do you consider in terms of a goddess? Again, we talked about the definition. It's a little bit fluid. So first of all, you'd have to hammer that down, and then you'd have to think about. There are goddesses where they emerge as part of a civilization. And so there's a lot of evidence, archaeological, literary, historical evidence for that goddess. What about goddesses that we just see drawn on a cave, but we don't really know what they are? So my answer to you is the moment human beings existed, there was probably a goddess. That's my answer. So tens of thousands of years old. One of the oldest that and actually this is the thing I speak about in the book. Maru Lisa, for example, the goddess from ancient Benin, the dating is very difficult because there isn't that extant evidence I've just spoken to you about. There's not a massive, beautiful historical archaeological record where I can go carbon date and tell you this happened. So she is likely to be even older than the one that I know is old, which is Inanna from 5,000, 6,000 BCE. She is often given as an answer. And we like that answer because we can date it, right? But that's not. I don't think that's actually true, because some of these goddesses will. Like, how can we date our Maori goddess from New Zealand? How can we date Huitaka from Colombia? Because how long were these people in active worship of that goddess? That's really hard to pin down. So I think best way to think about it, since the dawn of human beings, we had this. If you've ever looked up into a sky, regardless of your religious belief, you will be a little bit in awe of it, and a bit like, what the hell's going on up there? And I think it starts with that, and it evolves. So, official answer, Inanna.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think we have time for maybe a couple more before we come to an end. So, if anyone else has a question, you can put your hand up.
So in history, we end up having things that are lost, or, we can't know everything about it. So is there an aspect of history that you would love to know about? And then as a writer, would you like to fill that up with your own, writing?
I quite like that question because it leads neatly into my next book.
Oh, great.
Well, the thing is, for the rest of my life, there's stuff I want to know, and it'll go on forever, and then I'll die, and someone else will do it, and it'll go on forever, and then they'll die. The thing is this is the point about history, which is kind of cool. It's not static at all. I mean, no study is static. If you're a scientist, there's new things every day. And that's the cool thing about knowledge, right? It's evolving all the time. So I love that about history, and there'll be a billion things that I would love to know more about. I have to focus. So I did actually ask my editor if I'm allowed to tell you, but I've signed the contract. She didn't send me back a text, so it's tough now. I'm going to do it. She's watching.
Is it exclusive then?
Yeah, it's good. Exclusive here, because I only signed it this week. So my next book is going to be about, it's going to sound really random after this book, but it's about female dragon slayers in history. Yes, thank you. I've got 5 pre-sales. I'm so excited. I have not written a word yet. So one of my main specialisms, my MA, is all about dragons. So it's I've loved it. I've actually done a TV show on it on History Hit. So I'm obsessed with dragons. And I didn't know much about the female dragon slayers of history. I know you're all thinking St. George in your head, or whatever else that you're interested in, but there is evidence across the world of women slaying dragons, and they don't always look quite the same as the male counterparts. They kind of got all sorts of different cool bits to it. So I will be writing a book that will be, not quite sure of the format just yet, but I think, again, like you guys have just realised, I love the storytelling, so I think I might try and go more historical fiction this time. And really get into the characters of the women that I've chosen to look at. So it will feel like probably more the storytelling aspects of this, but I will weave in a lot about the historical relevance and symbolism of dragons, which is way more fascinating than you think. I mean, if you love dragons, you already know it's cool. But if you don't love dragons, there's, like I said, the monsters, essentially what they are, symbolise so much about light and dark and the monster within. There's a lot of human psychology. Freud was obsessed with it. Jung was obsessed with it. What monsters can tell us about our own humanity. So there's going to be a load of that in there too. And I need to start writing it after this. So yeah, there you go.
Big whoop from the audience, and I'm just thinking, I don't know how to top.
Listen to that, publishers. Listen to that. Why don't we get the advance up a little bit, guys? Come on.
I don't know how to top female dragon slayers. And we might have time for maybe one question if someone's got an itch to ask. Otherwise, I will just kind of draw it to an end soon.
You can always come to me at the end if you want to.
Yes, of course. There's going to be a book signing as well, so you'll have a chance then. So I guess maybe just to end, another quote from the book. And so in the last chapter on the goddess Isis, you say, in a diverse and multicultural world, Isis's transcendence serves as a reminder of the universal thread that connects all living beings. Mm-hmm. So obviously we kind of alluded a little bit to the current social political climate, and I guess like a kind of a final words that you might want to share. How can people channel their divine feminine attributes to create a more hopeful vision for the future?
Yeah, I mean, I am an optimist, even though I've not sounded like it sometimes today. I really want, this is really the core message of the book. I want people to read it, and by looking at those goddesses and looking at the past, take a moment of self-reflection. I actually kind of ask people to do that at times in the book. They might be old, gone, you might not believe in them, they might not be real to you, but what they have to tell you is actually a lot about your inner world. And I like that idea. And I think that introspection is a really important thing in this current world, because there's a lot of craziness going on out there, and sometimes I think our minds are quite muddled by all the messaging, and it's not even just, I'm not even the bad stuff. I just mean, like, you know, social media. I mean, every day bombarded by 40 different thousand billion ways to think and feel, and that stresses me out as a person. But I think that what I wanted from this book is a chance for you to meet these goddesses and go, do you know what? That little bit of that goddess or this little thing just showed me a little piece of myself, and that hopefully can restore something in you that's good, whatever that is for you. Male, female, whatever gender you are, whatever age you are, whatever colour you are, whatever religion you are, that you can just restore a little bit of something in yourself. Because I think I see the ancient world as a bit of a medicine for the modern world. I'm not going to lie to you. It wasn't all brilliant back then, but there are some wonderful wisdoms that have been common to all humans throughout time. I find that really comforting, and I really hope that I love the goddess Isis because she's the goddess of knowledge, and that's why I ended with her, because in lots of ways it's full circle. Then it's me hoping that I can give you some knowledge perhaps that you didn't have, that restores pieces of yourself, so you can perhaps just live a more balanced and happy life in a world that feels a bit cray-cray.
No, that's such a wonderful kind of point to end on. Thank you so much, Jasmine. Just on a very final note, if anyone wants to kind of have a look out for your next book and follow your work, where's the best way to follow you?
Just get me on the old Instagram, because I don't do Twitter because it's Twitter. No. But if you don't do things like that, I've got a website and I try to keep that. You can just put my name into Google, it'll come up then, or Instagram. Those are the best places to keep. I'm really active on those, so you can find stuff. So catch me on that. It's legit classicist, because I did that years ago when I had a podcast and I can't change it. So, or just my name.
No, so, yeah, that's great. But thank you so much. Yeah, no, but thank you for everything that you've shared today. It's been so wonderful. I mean, learning obviously about your journey and everything, but obviously getting to know the goddesses more as well. And thank you to the audience. So there will be a book signing. Jasmine will be outside. There's a table set up if you'd like to get a copy of the book and have it signed. And just a very quick note to say that there's another talk. Well, it's a panel discussion which will be taking place at 1:30. This is with the SI Leeds Literary Prize, and it's going to be facilitated by Masuda Snaith, who is also one of the authors actually I interviewed this morning. So hopefully you're able to hang around for that. But otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for coming.